All right, y'all. Welcome back to another ESG call, Entrepreneur Support Group. Today, we are going to recap a podcast episode. I won't date this podcast, but we're going to review, kind of just have an open conversation of a guest we had on, Trayvon Vaughn. Um, I know I came away from that interview inspired, motivated, all of those things. So let's dive right into it. What were some of the key things that stood out to you during that conversation?
Well, you already know I was taking notes during that. I think let me start with how crazy it is to see somebody that I literally taught in English become the person, the man that he is today, the entrepreneur, the motivator, the inspiration. Like it's really awesome to see that kind of growth in him.
Yeah, if you can explain how you actually met him. I know obviously you explained it to me. You said that you taught him, but like give us more context behind that.
Yeah. So when I was in Maryland the last few years, I was there to have income and still work all of my basketball stuff. I was substitute teaching at my old high school. And his English teacher was pregnant and went out on maternity leave. And so while she was gone, I was covering her classes. And so he was one of my students in his, I think it was his senior English class. Maybe it was his junior. I don't know. Whatever it was. One of those two. He was one of my students in class. And he and I we connected right away. And it's similar in a way, I guess, like Aaliyah, because I taught her, I coached her in high school, and you connect with people no matter what age they are who have similar mindsets, and you can see that, like, raised in a small town, we aren't taught those, oh, become an entrepreneur, start your own business. You're kind of taught to see things in a very narrow aspect. Like they teach you life in the county, not life outside and life in the world, but you kind of connect with those people that you can see have a bigger purpose and are going to do something. And so he and I just, I mean, we clicked, we got along great, and sports probably helped with that, and we've stayed in touch all this time, which has been awesome. And we've talked more frequently lately, but it's kind of the entrepreneur path has probably brought us a little bit closer together. But yeah, seeing that in him, like seeing him change, like, just, it's awesome. It's really powerful, because I mean, you're
Mm,
seeing it, you're seeing the power behind him with just seeing him for the first time today. So knowing him as a teenager to now, it's like, wow, like he's going to do amazing things in the world.
mm. So to give the audience context, like I said, we recorded a podcast with him, and he was just dropping gems left and right, just crazy. And it's like it's almost like basketball, right? Coaches say the same thing. You can go to a camp across the country, and the coach is going to, for the most part, teaching you the same skills.
Mhm.
But when they're coming from another voice, from another experience, and said in a different way, it hits different.
Oh yeah.
Like like one of the things that like I was really clinging on to was like have a vision and make it plain. Like have a vision and really cling on to that vision, like recreating yourself, like that whole recreation process and having a vision for your life is very important. Like or or else you'll just get steered and kind of meandering from thing to thing and living a purposeless life. But once you have a vision, make it plain, you begin to figure out what your why is, and then that
Mhm.
becomes your engine. A lot of times we build the vehicle first without figuring out how the engine is going to work. Is it going to work on diesel fuel or gas fuel? Like let's let's figure out our why, which is the engine, and then from there we can create the vehicle that's going to get us to the destination. Like that, I'm still like wrapping my head around that one. That was because it was really like the way he was able to articulate that concept was just mind blowing for me.
I mean, so many concepts, because the stuff that I just kept having to type as he was talking, like these two actually, concepts, they came separately, but they actually piggyback off of each other. Like when he was talking about the power of the other person, and I think about that especially in the team setting, energy transmits. And so whether it's positive or negative, you have the ability to bring somebody down or you have the ability to lift them up. And that's where he was talking about, like with the firefighters, they're lifting as they climb. And like, that's the thing, as entrepreneurs, we tend to kind of, not all the time, but sometimes you see the people in any kind of business, really, like you don't want to help the competition. Like people don't want to help you because they don't want to take the chance of you stealing their customer base or their client base. And the reality is there are enough people in the world that we can all do what we're doing and still help each other succeed. And without that, none of us are going to get very far. If we don't have a team, it doesn't have to be the team that works for us, but we have to have that support system outside of that, or we're never going to get anywhere. Not one of us can do this shit by ourselves. Like, we need help.
Yeah, and I think oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
One thing, one thing also that stuck out to me was that mentor part when he was saying he saw the fruits,
Mm-hmm.
he saw their fruits
The
and the
fruits from their tree.
continual,
Yeah.
yeah, and that stood out to me because like, in my background, like it's honestly been like whoever has decided to take the time out to impart wisdom on me, I kind of
Mm-hmm.
latch onto it. But just because somebody's willing to take time doesn't mean that they're the right person that should be mentoring. Like you really have to, what is the phrase that everybody that parents use? Do as I say, not as I do. And it's like, no, we need to see what they're doing and then decide, do I want that? Because if I don't want that, then I can only take their advice with a grain of salt because they
Yep.
don't have what I want, And I think, I mean, when you're young, it's hard to have that discernment, right? Especially when you're trying to figure out life. But I think that that's very crucial because if you all it takes is the wrong mentor to steer you down the wrong path long enough, and now you got to play catch up.
And he mentioned that with the making sure people's actions match their words. Like that's what you have to look for, the people who don't just tell you great things, but that are also doing those same things that they're telling you. Man, and oh my gosh, one of the other things I really, never mind. There are so many things that he said that I was just like, dang.
You got to watch the
But
interview. I think.
like when he said, all that I do know is not all that there is to know. Man, we get so stuck in, I know how to do this, or this is how, you get so stuck in your own mindset that you stop learning sometimes. And you don't realize that just because you know how to do it this way doesn't mean that's the only way to do it, or doesn't mean that there isn't a better way to do it. And being humble enough to know that you don't know everything and to continue to learn.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And I guess this one actually kind of piggybacks on that one. He said a lot of stuff that relates. You've got to be willing to be bad at something long enough to get good.
That microwave mentality, man. I'm just gonna learn something. I mean, man, it's funny because I see it all the time. Like, just even in the simplest form, when it comes to kids learning basketball, I teach them something, they try it for 2 minutes, and they're like, it's hard, and they get frustrated. I'm like, bro,
Uh-huh.
I just showed you this. What you expect to just automatically just pick it up? Like, oh, you're perfect. Oh, my bad. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you were perfect and an anomaly. I thought you were human. Like yeah, like we're gonna be bad at things when we start, but we gotta again, if you don't have the right engine, when you get that headwind of you doing bad, not want to say you doing bad things, but being bad at it and the mental anguish that comes along with being bad at something because you want to do good, but you just don't have the skills capable enough. Are you mentally tough enough to continue to go along with it?
There's actually, like what you were just saying, this is the white girl coming out of me, because there's actually a country song by Miranda Lambert called Automatic. And the whole chorus of that song is, hey, whatever happened to waiting your turn, doing it all by hand? Because when everything is handed to you, it's only worth as much as the time put in.
Mm, mm, that's a bar. Man,
Yeah.
that's a country song.
Yes.
Okay,
My
bars.
my white my white girl side comes in handy sometimes.
Sorry.
But it's
But
so true, because we've become this instant gratification society where everything, and that's that's the chicken and the egg. Is it the kid's fault or is it the adult's fault for fostering that? Because I don't even know where it started and how it got that bad, because I wasn't raised that way, and I'm still not raised like my family still doesn't buy into that. But so it's harder for me to get it. But I mean, people are, especially kids and younger people, are so used to having everything handed for them, everything fixed for them, everything done for them. So when it is challenging, when they do have to work a little bit harder, they don't know how.
Hmm.
And especially with entrepreneurship, man, like, I mean, we've seen it, like all the stuff that we've had to be doing lately just to get these clinics off the ground. Like Ali and I talk about this all the time. This is why entrepreneurs fail, because most people don't have the patience or the strength, or as Trayvon said, the perseverance to deal with all of this stuff, especially if you're dealing with all of it when you're dealing with all of your other responsibilities too.
Hmm.
It's a lot. I mean, there are days last week that I felt like I was working every freaking waking minute. And, you know, a lot of people don't want to put in that work.
Hmm. So, so for all y'all out there in podcast land, YouTube land, check out that interview that we did with Trayvon, man, because it will inspire you. It will motivate you. He was dropping some gems, man. Shout
There's
out to
so
him.
many
Shout out
more
to
that
him.
we haven't even covered.
Yeah, but we just had to shed some light on that young man. He's killing the game. I love that. That's awesome. Um, but let's continue with our 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. We're down to our last two, so we're almost there, getting through the whole book. Golly, that's a big book.
Geez, now we're actually going to have to pick a new topic for next week.
Yeah, I have some in my back pocket
All
that we
right,
can,
good.
and I got another book too that I want to potentially bring to the forefront. We'll talk about that later. But we're on law number 20, which is the law of explosive growth. And usually I do apologize because usually before the lesson, I like to reread the topic so that way I have a better understanding. So I'm going through just my notes. So AP will help me out since she has the book in
Book in
front.
front
But
of her.
yeah. But one of the concepts that he talks about followers versus leader math. A lot of I want to say a lot of leaders, but there's leaders who will bring people with them just so they can follow, kind of like a narcissism type of play. Whereas like certain leaders want to build up other leaders because leader math becomes exponential. If I'm one leader and I have 10 followers underneath me, they're going to remain followers and I'm not going to empower them to become better leaders. But if I'm one leader and I have 10 followers and I can build them up to be leaders, now they can develop more leaders. So now those 10 leaders each get 5 or 10 leaders underneath them. And that's the leader math that he talks about, the law of explosive growth. So as you develop more and more leaders, your organization grows.
Yeah. Do you want his words on it?
Absolutely.
You did a good job of explaining it, though. If you develop yourself, you can experience personal success. If you develop a team, your organization can experience growth. If you develop leaders, your organization can achieve explosive growth.
Hmm. There it is. Summed up better than I did. Sure. It's almost like he wrote the book. But uh, but I mean it's something I never really thought of. I mean, for example, in corporate culture, you don't see that. Like it goes into the conversation that we were talking about previously with Trayvon. It's that, everything's so cutthroat and competitive. What's the air quote benefit to building up other leaders? They're
Yeah.
just going to take my job. They're just going to blah 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 blah. All those negative thoughts, lack mindset things, which I mean rightfully so, right? Especially in that culture. But if you want a culture of building people up and having growth and essentially working yourself out of a job, right? I mean, that should be our
Yeah.
goal as leaders and entrepreneurs, to where the only thing we are doing is just overseeing and pouring into our team so they can kind of um handle things for us.
Well, and you
Not
hit the
for us.
nail on the head right there. It comes down to culture. And so people, as they're building their businesses, really have to think, like, what kind of culture do I want to have? Because culture will, I don't want to say it will tear you down, because it doesn't always, but culture can make your work environment very toxic. to the point where even though your business is successful, you have a lot of employee turnover, you have a lot of management turnover, and you're constantly having to, train new people, or you can create that culture of empowerment that people want to be a part of.
Mhm.
There is room for everybody to grow. And sometimes you may lose people in the process of helping them grow, but that just means you get to bring more people in and help develop them.
Mhm.
It's not always a bad thing.
Exactly. And Maxwell continues with this explosive growth by talking about three facts when it comes to building up other leaders. He says, one, leaders are hard to find. And I know that's one of the things I'm seeing too, and most of America is seeing it in the corporate culture because people who are leaders and who are good at what they do, they don't want to be led by somebody who's not going to lead them, who's not going to pour into them, who's going to keep them at a certain level. I mean, I personally have personal experiences from organizations where, I want to grow in the organization, but I'm not giving that chance. You're not going to keep leaders like that. You have to give them space
Yeah.
where they can grow and develop. You look like you were about to say something. I didn't know if
Nope.
you were about to say
I'm listening.
something. Okay. The second thing he says is leaders are hard to gather. They want to know where you're going and if this is more compelling than what they're currently doing. So you must create an environment to bring in more leaders. Falls back into might have been even the first law, which is vision, the whole concept of vision and knowing where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, you can't explain that to your teammates or your team members who are eventually going to be leaders in the organization. It's going to be hard for them to buy in completely. They're just going to go somewhere else. And then the last one is pretty obvious. I would say leaders are hard to keep because
Yeah.
if you don't have something that's um, long-term minded, doesn't fit into their vision, they're not going to buy in. They're not going to stay. Um, yeah, thoughts on that? I have one more note when it comes to this explosive growth, and then we're on the next one. Oh, that's just a stat. I don't know fact how the statistical relevance of this, but he says 85% said that another leader inspired them to be a better leader.
That's what I was actually about to say as soon as you jumped in, because I saw that part on the page, and he said it was at a leadership conference. He took an informal I can't talk today, informal poll to find out what prompted the attendees to become leaders. And so the influence of another leader was 85%, result of crisis was 5%, and natural gifting was 10%. And I mean, it makes sense though, because even if you have the instinct of natural leadership, it still doesn't mean you know how to use it to get other people to follow, or to get other people to follow consistently or well. And crisis, I mean, it'll do it, but it's not the best way to have to learn how and jump right in. Like, it's that mentor, that motivation. I mean, even like with this morning, doing the interview with Trayvon, and both of us walking out like, dang, like we got something out of that we weren't expecting. It's that motivation and inspiration can really drive a person to do even more amazing things.
Mhm. So that's law number 20, the law of explosive growth. And then the last law, the law of legacy. Maxwell says a leader's lasting value is measured by succession. Um, how leaders build up to legacy. So he gives us four steps to legacy. I guess building up to legacy. I guess the first step would be like the achievement phase or step, right? Where you're doing big things by yourself. Then you have the success stage where you're empowering your followers to do things for you. And then there's the significant stage where you're developing leaders to do great things with them. And then the legacy stage is when you're putting leaders in position to do great things without you. So it's almost like that I'm not sure what law it was, but the law of when it comes to giving over responsibilities, the delegation process, right? I think it was one like I do it with you, or one I show you how it's done. Then the second one is like I do it with you, then you do it and I watch, and then the last one is like you do it by yourself. It's almost like leadership,
Yeah.
follows those similar steps. Um, any thoughts on that whole legacy part? I think maybe the legacy part is maybe one of the, I don't want to say underappreciated. With I can't think of the word. What's the word that I'm thinking of? Overlooked. I think it's one of the most overlooked things when it comes to building a business or entrepreneurship in general is like, what's your exit strategy? That's the term that people usually use, your exit strategy,
Yeah.
but what's your succession strategy? Like, are
Yeah.
you building a business that like once you're done, the business is done, or are you trying to build something that can be sustainable over time and continuous impact?
Well, and we've seen that in a lot of huge corporations that have really great cultures, and then there's a leadership change, and suddenly things aren't going as well as they used to. And they've got to find that vision again. And it's funny because I'm listening to this and I can actually visualize this from a family perspective, which is weird.
Mm,
But because I was brought up in a family, my grandmother was one of the first women in broadcasting. So even as girls growing up, like we were, she was a leader, she was a pioneer. And so that's what we got to grow up watching. And, we were raised with that mindset that we can live that same lifestyle. We can be that same type of person and that there's nothing that we can't do. But it's funny because since she's been gone, we've seen without that matriarch, without that head of the family, all of the things that have started to happen without her, and the fighting and the separation and the people going their different ways. Like that's so much like a business, because if you're not teaching somebody else, like she taught us all how to be leaders, but at the same time, the generation that should be stepping up and bringing us together, they're doing so much fighting over who's going to take control that everybody's kind of going their own path. And businesses work the same way. Like if you don't have the right leadership stepping in, things fall apart. Everything you worked for is suddenly non-existent. You look like you're struggling with sound.
Yeah, I was one of my AirPods dying.
one of my AirPods is dying, so I put the other one in, and because I put it in, and like Siri popped up, and I'm like, Siri, what are you doing? Like, I'm recording a podcast. Keep going.
I'm just watching you play with your ears and looking like very confused.
Trying to read lips the whole time. I couldn't hear. I was like,
I mean, basically, like you have to have, if you're not developing somebody to take your role when you're gone, whether it's family or whether it's a business, I mean, things fall apart. They're not what they were before, and people go their separate ways. Or in the case of business, you may not be making the same type of money that you were if your values, if your leadership, all of that, if your culture changes, because all of that those impacts trickle down.
and one of the things that I thought about was just like, well, piggybacking off of what you said with the family is with both of these laws, actually, with the law of explosive growth and the law of legacy. If you look at some of these families, like the Rockefellers, like any other historic family that has had a huge great example of this is the Chick-fil-A model. That's one of the reasons why they're a privately held company, because they're keeping it in the family, and that family is developing leaders so that way they can expand the business. And it's like, and even like stepping away from business for a second, as a family, as a person who's raising a family, if you're not mindful of the way that you're raising, I don't even say raising, but impacting your, I don't even want to say children because you got nieces and nephews and all of that, because you can pour into all of them and kind of give them that leadership capability. Like you said, if you're not pouring into them and teaching them how to be leaders and developing them as leaders, it doesn't matter how much wealth you accumulate in your lifetime, that next generation, they're not going to have those. I'm not saying they're not going to have it, but the chances of them having those skills, if you're not pouring into them, are, I mean, as we see, we can't expect society to teach them that. That's not what society is for. Society's not to teach you to be a leader, to teach you to be a follower. So if you want, your family and family's family to be leaders, you have to develop those leaders, and it starts with having that legacy mindset.
Mhm.
I read this book back in like 2021, and like after reading it, I started taking more and more steps to, because I don't personally have any kids, but my brothers and sister have kids. So I started to take more time to invest into those relationships because I see that, oh, I'm an influential person in their lives. Oh, if they see the things that I'm doing and I can come back and impart some wisdom on them, and these, okay, maybe they'll kind of like the gears will start turning in them, and I would have never had that thought process if I wasn't thinking about my legacy and the legacy of our family.
And so much of it is teaching. It's not just teaching leaders how to be leaders, but it's teaching leaders how to create other leaders.
Yeah.
Because I know I can say that's the disconnect in our family. My grandmother taught us all how to be leaders, but I can see it in the generation above me. It's the power struggle that's killing us,
Mm,
because you've got the ones who see leadership as control, and you've got the other ones who see leadership as empowerment. And those two forces, when they come together in one location, it can get pretty ugly. And so
yeah.
it's you have to develop the leader, but you also have to, develop the leader's understanding of what it means to be a leader.
Hmm. And before we close out, I just want to do a quick recap of all the laws of leadership. I'm gonna just breeze through all of them, uh, because I mean, there's 21. I mean, this was able to last us multiple weeks. This is maybe like an
Yeah.
8-week course of this book, and it's like, even though we went through it, I could easily go through all of these and learn and be able to apply something different to it. And I think that's just the value of books, right? In general,
Yeah.
like it's a resource. And I was a victim of this too. I used to read just for leisure. I
Mhm.
would pop in an audiobook, go for a walk. When I was lifeguarding, I'd put an audiobook in. I would be learning. There's a stat, I don't know the exact number, but my guesstimate from what I can remember is that is that of the information you receive, you're gonna lose 90% of it
Oh, yeah.
within about an hour. So you're only gonna retain about 10% of that information. So if you're reading a book, and even when we do these type of calls where we review a book, you still have to keep that book as a resource.
Mhm.
Shout out to AP for actually getting the physical copy. Whereas myself, I got to open up the audiobook and re-listen to it. I have to take notes and read. So just sharing that to say, like, even though you read this book, or if you read the book, or even if you've been watching these, you still have to take time to apply these to your life and maybe and ponder them and chew on them. It's almost like what they say with Bible verses, like meditate on these day and night. It's
Mhm.
almost like that type of concept, like these leadership principles and books, like
Yeah.
you have to think about applying them in your daily life, in your daily practice.
Well, and even if somebody has watched all of our Zooms on the book, that's amazing. But this is essentially a book report. There's so many things that we would be spending the next year if we covered every single detail in this book. And so all we're doing is giving the highlights. So if people aren't going back and reading and taking notes and applying it on their own, they're missing
A lot.
probably 75 to 80% of the book.
A lot. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So just a
All right.
quick recap. We got number one, law of the lid. How well you lead determines how well you succeed. Leadership is the lid to your potential. Law number two, the law of influence. Leadership is influence. When you speak, people listen. Number 3 is the law of process, one of my favorite laws. Law of 4, the law of navigation, charting your course. We have law number 5, the law of addition, being able to add value to others. Number 6, the law of solid ground, talking about character. We have that's where I got mixed up because 6 goes into 8, but 8 is number 7 because I was on track. Number 7, the law of intuition, right? The filter or bias that leaders should the filters and biases that are causing gaps in our leadership. Number 8, the law of magnetism. You are who you attract. Law number 10, the law of connection. The heart comes before the hat. Number 11, the law of the inner circle, talking about building up your team. The more you invest into your team, the more returns your team is going to grant. Therefore, the law of empowerment, only secure leaders give power to others. Number 13, law of pit. For some reason, I don't know. I was like 13. Did I skip one? Did I skip one? No, I didn't. Okay. Law 13, the law of pitchers, leading by example. Number 14, the law
Yeah.
of buy-in, getting people to buy into your vision. Well, before people buy into your vision, they got to buy into you as a leader. The law of victory, setting your team up for success. The law of momentum, creating those consistent successes so we can continue to build. The law of priorities, activity is not necessarily accomplishment. Law number 18, the law of sacrifices, leaders give up to go up. Law number 19, the law of timing. And the 2 we went over today, the law of explosive growth, follower math versus leader math. And number 21, the law of legacy. A leader's lasting value is measured by succession. Whew. I'm proud of myself because as I was able to list off each law, I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what now? I guess we got to find another book
Yeah.
or more
New
topics.
topic.
Guess we got to learn more things.
But we've had an inspiring morning to help create ideas. So.
For sure. For sure. So for all those out there listening or watching, podcast land, YouTube land, we appreciate you. We'll be back next week.